Those of you who know me are aware that I cry at the opening of supermarkets. I've wept over ribbon cutting at a used car lot. Too often, the world has been unkind, in many instances crushingly cruel, to these, our brothers and sisters. The real successes at BYU are the personal experiences that thousands have had. Personal experiences difficult to document or categorize or list. Nevertheless, these are so powerful in their impact on the heart and the mind that they have changed us forever.
They had taught me that being heterosexual was the only way to be. I knew I wasn't, but I wanted to be heterosexual. So they said, you know, you need to go down to BYU, and I'm like 15 years old. So I went in and sat down, and they kind of explained to me what was going on, and I was horrified by the whole prospect of what turned out to be vomiting aversion therapy. They would place a heparin lock in my wrist, and then they could hook an IV up to that, and I would be placed in a room alone and with a plethysmograph on my penis that would measure physical arousal. So when I started to get an erection, they would know. And then they would start to show me gay pornography, and using the IV and the heparin lock would inject an emetic drug into my system, and I would start vomiting while watching the gay pornography. And then they would switch it over to heterosexual pornography and inject a euphoric drug into me so that I would associate a feeling of euphoria with heterosexuality. I look back on that, and I think if they had offered me electric shock therapy, I would have done that. But I'm extremely phobic around vomiting. I was supposed to come back like the next day for the first treatment, and I just didn't show up. And then I called in sick and then just ignored things, and then they just said, you just have to come in and tell us what's going on. So I went in and said, I can't do it. And so they wrote out a shaming letter for me, a letter of shame that I had to hand carry back to my stake president, telling him that I had refused to go through with the Lord's program for my cure.
I'd like to hear a little more musket fire from the Temple of Learning.
We did the therapy, as we referred to it, then in the basement of the Smith Family Living Center on the BYU campus.
I and many of my brethren have spent more time and shed more tears on this subject than we could ever adequately convey to you this morning or any morning.
They would come in, usually 3 times a week.
We have spent hours discussing what the doctrine of the church can and cannot provide the individuals and families struggling over this difficult issue.
They had the choice. They could look at pornographic magazines, or we would show videos up on the wall, and we would tape electrodes to their groin, and about 3 or 4 inches down from that on their thigh. Then we would also tape up on their chest, and we taped somewhere else too. I think it was up close to the armpits. And then we had another machine that would monitor their breathing and their heart rate. And what we would do is we would let them look at this stuff, and when and if they were looking at homosexual pornographic material, we would wait until we could tell a difference in their heart rate. We had a dial that we turned, and that would determine the amount of current that would would go into the shock. And if they were a new patient, then the current would be very low. And we would wait until we saw that they were getting aroused, and then we would push a button and the voltage would go into the wire. I'm sure that it was painful. And then after we did that, then we would the movies would automatically switch over, and we would show a man and a woman having sex, and we would play very soothing music in the background to try and get the mind to relate to that.
So it's with a little scar tissue of our own.
When we got into the higher voltage with the people who had been doing it longer, you could see burn marks on the skin, and quite often they would also throw up.
We have wept and prayed and wept again.
We did have some people who became completely asexual after undergoing the therapy. But no, we never changed anyone from gay to straight.
And I'll go to my grave pleading that this institution not only stands, but stands unquestionably committed to its unique academic mission and the church that sponsors it.
We had several people who committed suicide during the therapy. We had 3 different people who hung themselves in the Harris Fine Arts Center from the balcony.
It must be the greatest university in the world.
I think for Mormonism, this is going to be the most difficult issue that they're ever going to face, seriously. They have painted themselves into a theological corner. Either Mormon theology is right and I am just a deviant heterosexual or a lapsed heterosexual, or I am intrinsically, essentially queer. And if I am, then Mormon theology is wrong.
It must be the greatest university in the world.